Welcome to Episode 3 of our PMI-ACP certification study series. In this episode, we'll cover stakeholder engagement, which falls under Domain 3 of the exam content outline. Question 21. What makes stakeholder engagement in Agile different from traditional approaches? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Domain 3 addresses one of the most challenging aspects of Agile practice, engaging stakeholders as active collaborators rather than passive recipients of status reports. This domain carries a 17% weighting, reflecting the critical importance of this skill. In traditional project management, stakeholder engagement often means gathering requirements at the beginning, providing periodic status updates during execution, and delivering the final product at the end. Stakeholders are customers of the project team's work, reviewing outputs but not actively participating in the process. Agile fundamentally reimagines this relationship. Stakeholders become partners in the work. They're present in sprint reviews, providing feedback on actual working software. They're available for clarifying questions throughout the sprint. They help prioritize the backlog based on evolving business needs. The product owner role institutionalizes this partnership, providing a dedicated representative of stakeholder interests within the team. Why does this matter? Because requirements documents are imperfect representations of actual needs. By the time detailed specifications are written, reviewed, approved, and implemented, the underlying needs may have changed. Direct ongoing collaboration ensures the team builds what stakeholders actually need, not just what was documented months ago. For the exam, understand that the goal of stakeholder engagement is not to manage stakeholders or keep them informed. The goal is genuine collaboration that improves outcomes. Questions will test whether you can distinguish between approaches that treat stakeholders as outsiders to be managed versus approaches that treat them as partners in value creation. The Agile Manifesto value, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, is directly relevant. We seek partnership, not adversarial protection. This means building trust, maintaining transparency, and creating mechanisms for ongoing dialogue. One more thing, stakeholder engagement requires soft skills. Active listening, emotional intelligence, facilitation, and conflict resolution all come into play. The exam tests your understanding of these human skills, not just processes and techniques. Question 22. What tools and techniques help establish a shared vision with stakeholders? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Creating alignment around a shared vision prevents the common problem of stakeholders pulling in different directions. Let me cover the key techniques you'll need for the exam. The Agile Charter is a lightweight document that establishes the project's foundation. Unlike traditional charters that can run dozens of pages, an Agile Charter focuses on the essentials. Why are we doing this? What's the vision? Who's involved? What methodology will we use? It provides enough context for everyone to understand the purpose without drowning in detail that will soon be obsolete. For exam scenarios, the Agile Charter helps when teams lack clarity about purpose or when stakeholders have conflicting expectations. It's created at project inception and may be revisited if fundamental direction changes. Personas are fictional archetypes representing real user types. Rather than designing for abstract users, we design for specific personas like Sarah, the busy retail manager who needs inventory information at a glance, or Marcus, the new hire who doesn't know industry terminology yet. Personas ground the team in human needs rather than abstract requirements. Personas are developed through user research, not imagination. They capture goals, frustrations, behaviors, and contexts. When the team faces a design decision, they can ask, "What would Sarah need here?" This prevents the trap of building for ourselves or for an imagined average user. For the exam, personas help when requirements seem too abstract or when the team loses touch with actual user needs. They're particularly valuable when stakeholders disagree about priorities, since referencing personas can depoliticize discussions. Wireframes are low-fidelity visual guides for product functionality. They look rough and unfinished intentionally. High-fidelity mock-ups make people think they're seeing a finished product. Wireframes clearly signal this is a draft for discussion. Wireframes address the Aiki-Wisi phenomenon, which stands for I'll know it when I see it. Many stakeholders cannot articulate their needs until they see something concrete. A wireframe provides that concrete representation early, before code is written, when changes are cheap. For exam scenarios, wireframes help when stakeholders have trouble visualizing functionality or when requirements discussions become too abstract. They're a form of rapid prototyping that enables feedback before investment. Product roadmaps provide a high-level view of planned product evolution. They're not detailed plans, but rather directional guidance showing major themes, features, or milestones over time. This helps stakeholders understand where the product is headed without pretending to know exactly what will be delivered when. For the exam, roadmaps support strategic alignment and set expectations appropriately. They acknowledge uncertainty about the distant future while providing enough visibility for stakeholders to make their own plans. All of these tools share a common purpose. They create artifacts that enable conversation and build shared understanding. They're not ends in themselves, but means for stakeholder engagement. Question 23. What is osmotic communication and why does it matter for Agile teams? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Osmotic communication is a concept coined by Alistair Cockburn to describe the natural flow of information in shared spaces. When team members work in the same physical area, they pick up information by overhearing relevant conversations. This happens without formal meetings, without status reports, without anyone deliberately transmitting information. Imagine a developer working on feature X. Nearby, two other developers are discussing a technical challenge they're encountering with the same API that feature X will use. The developer working on feature X overhears this conversation and learns about the challenge before encountering it themselves. No meeting was scheduled, no document was written, information simply flowed through proximity. This is powerful because formal communication channels have overhead. Scheduling meetings takes time, writing documents takes time, reading documents takes time. Much information never gets formally communicated because the overhead isn't worth it. But when teams share space, low value per instance but high value in aggregate information spreads naturally. For the exam, osmotic communication is an argument for co-location when possible. It explains why co-located teams often outperform distributed teams despite advances in collaboration technology. The constant low-effort information flow creates a kind of group awareness that's hard to replicate remotely. However, the exam may also present scenarios with distributed teams. In these cases, the Agile approach is to maximize osmotic-like communication through video presence, open chat channels, and frequent synchronous interaction. Some distributed teams maintain always-on video connections, creating a virtual shared space. Others use persistent chat rooms where team conversation flows continuously. One nuance: osmotic communication can become noise if the space is too crowded or discussions too frequent. Teams need to balance information flow with focused work time. This is why many Agile workspaces include both open collaboration areas and quiet spaces for concentrated work. For exam scenarios, osmotic communication is the answer when questions address information flow, team awareness, or the benefits of co-location. If a scenario describes communication problems in a distributed team, creating more opportunities for osmotic-style interaction is often part of the solution. Question 24. What is emotional intelligence, and why is it critical for Agile leadership? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Technical skills alone are insufficient for Agile leadership. Stakeholder engagement requires emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive, understand, and manage emotions in yourself and others. The PMI-ACP tests your understanding of this concept because effective facilitation depends on it. Emotional intelligence, often abbreviated as EQ, consists of four components. Let me walk through each one. Self-awareness is the ability to understand your own emotions as they occur. Are you frustrated, anxious, excited? Self-aware leaders recognize their emotional states and understand how those states influence their behavior. When a stakeholder says something triggering, the self-aware leader notices their defensive reaction before acting on it. Self-management is the ability to control your reactions. Noticing that you're angry is self-awareness. Choosing not to respond angrily is self-management. Agile leaders need self-management because they'll face challenging situations, scope cuts, budget pressures, missed deadlines, interpersonal conflicts. Reacting emotionally undermines the calm facilitation that teams need. Social awareness, sometimes called empathy, is the ability to understand the emotions of others. A Scrum Master with high social awareness senses when a team member is burned out even if they haven't said anything. They notice the tension in a meeting before conflict erupts. They read body language, tone, and context to understand what people are really feeling beneath their words. Relationship management is the ability to use emotional information to inspire, influence, and develop others. This is where leadership happens. Understanding emotions is valuable, but using that understanding to build trust, resolve conflict, and motivate the team is the ultimate application. For exam scenarios, emotional intelligence questions often present interpersonal situations. A team member seems disengaged, stakeholders are resistant, conflict is brewing. The correct answer typically involves recognizing emotional dynamics, demonstrating social awareness, responding thoughtfully rather than reactively, demonstrating self-management, taking action that addresses the emotional reality, demonstrating relationship management. Incorrect answers often involve ignoring emotional dynamics and focusing only on process, or reacting emotionally rather than managing the situation. Here's an example. During the daily scrum, you notice that one team member seems unusually quiet and avoids eye contact when asked about their progress. What should you do? The process-only answer might be to note their status and move on. The daily scrum is time-boxed. We don't have time for personal conversations. But this ignores important information. The emotionally intelligent answer recognizes that something is wrong. After the daily scrum, you approach the team member privately. You express that you noticed they seemed uncomfortable and ask if there's anything they'd like to discuss. You listen without judgment. Maybe they're blocked and embarrassed. Maybe there's a personal issue. Maybe they have a concern about the project. Creating space for this conversation is relationship management in action. Question 25. What are the levels of listening and why do they matter for Agile practitioners? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Active listening is a core skill for Agile coaches, Scrum Masters, and anyone facilitating stakeholder engagement, but not all listening is equal. Understanding the levels of listening helps you improve your practice and recognize when you're not listening effectively. Level 1 is internal listening. At this level, you hear the words but interpret them through your own lens. Your inner monologue is active. How does this affect me? What am I going to say next? This reminds me of my own experience. You're physically present but mentally focused on yourself. Information comes in, but it's immediately filtered through your own perspective. Level 1 isn't always bad. When you're receiving instructions for a task you'll perform, you need to think about how it applies to you. But in coaching and facilitation contexts, level 1 listening misses much of what's really being communicated. Level 2 is focused listening. At this level, you focus entirely on the speaker. Your inner monologue quiets. You're genuinely curious about their experience. You notice their word choices, their pauses, their emphasis. You're not preparing your response, you're fully receiving their communication. This creates a sense of connection. The speaker feels heard, which builds trust and encourages openness. For Agile practitioners, Level 2 listening is appropriate for most one-on-one conversations. When a team member shares a concern, when a stakeholder explains their needs, when a product owner describes priorities, Level 2 listening helps you truly understand rather than just waiting for your turn to speak. Level 3 is global listening. At this level, you perceive the entire environment, not just the speaker's words. You notice body language, facial expressions, and posture. You sense the energy in the room. You detect what's not being said. In a meeting, you might notice that people physically pull back when a certain topic arises, even if nobody voices objection. Level 3, listening is essential for effective facilitation. A skilled scrum master running a retrospective listens globally. They notice when the energy drops, suggesting the topic has been exhausted. They notice when someone wants to speak but holds back. They sense when the group is aligning versus when disagreement is being suppressed. For exam scenarios, questions about communication or facilitation often test whether you understand the importance of deep listening. Incorrect answers might involve formulating responses while others speak, or focusing only on verbal content while missing nonverbal cues. Here's a practical application. During sprint planning, the team is estimating a user story. One developer gives it a high estimate while everyone else estimates low. The global listener notices this developer's body language, crossed arms, looking away, jaw tight. Even though they accept the group's estimate without argument, something is wrong. The skilled facilitator creates space. I noticed there was a difference of opinion. Let's discuss what might make this story more complex than it appears. Active listening is the foundation of stakeholder engagement. Without it, conversations become transactions where information is exchanged but understanding is not built. Question 26. What are collaborative games and how do they support stakeholder engagement? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Collaborative games, sometimes called innovation games, are facilitated exercises that make stakeholder engagement more effective and enjoyable. They use game mechanics to extract information, build consensus, and create shared understanding. The exam tests your knowledge of several common games. Prune the product tree uses a tree metaphor to structure the backlog. The trunk represents core functionality that must exist. Main branches represent major feature areas. Smaller branches and leaves represent specific features. Stakeholders place potential features on the tree, which forces them to think about how features relate to each other and to the product's core. This reveals structure that a flat list might hide. For exam purposes, prune the product tree is appropriate when you need to understand feature relationships and organize a backlog. It helps stakeholders see priorities in context rather than as isolated decisions. Speedboat, sometimes called sailboat, uses a nautical metaphor. The boat represents the product or project. Wind represents things propelling it forward. Strengths, enablers, what's going well. Anchors represent things holding it back. Impediments, frustrations, what's slowing progress. Rocks represent risks, dangers ahead that could cause problems. The destination island represents the goal. Stakeholders identify elements in each category. This surfaces both positive and negative factors and does so in a way that feels less confrontational than directly asking what's wrong with the project. The metaphor creates psychological safety. For exam purposes, speedboat is appropriate for retrospectives, project health checks, or any situation where you need to surface both strengths and concerns from stakeholders. Buy a feature gamifies prioritization. Features are assigned prices based on development cost. Stakeholders receive limited budgets. They must decide which features to buy with their money. The game forces trade-offs since stakeholders cannot afford everything. It also encourages negotiation. Stakeholders might pool resources to buy an expensive feature that benefits multiple parties. For exam purposes, buy a feature is appropriate when you need to prioritize among many options and want stakeholders actively engaged in the trade-offs. Product Box asks stakeholders to design the packaging for the product as if it were a retail item on a store shelf. What features would the box highlight? What claims would it make? What would make someone pick it up? This exercise surfaces what stakeholders believe is most compelling about the product and reveals differences in how stakeholders perceive its value. For exam purposes, product box is appropriate when clarifying product vision or when stakeholders have different ideas about what matters most. The common thread across these games is that they make abstract conversations concrete. Rather than discussing priorities in the abstract, stakeholders physically place items on trees, boats, or boxes. This externalizes thinking, surfaces disagreements, and creates artifacts that capture the discussion. For exam scenarios, collaborative games are appropriate when traditional requirements gathering or prioritization isn't working, when stakeholders are disengaged, or when you need creative input that structured meetings don't generate. Question 27. What techniques support participatory decision-making in Agile teams? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Agile emphasizes shared ownership, which means decisions should involve those affected by them. Participatory decision-making techniques help teams and stakeholders reach decisions efficiently while maintaining buy-in. Let me cover the main techniques you'll encounter. Simple voting uses thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways to quickly gauge opinion. It's fast and gives a visual snapshot of where the group stands. However, it's binary. You know someone opposes, but not how strongly or why. Use simple voting for quick pulse checks, not for important decisions where understanding reasoning matters. Fist of 5, sometimes called fist to 5, provides more nuance. Participants hold up 0 to 5 fingers to indicate their level of support. 1 or 2 fingers means strong objection. This is effectively a block. The person cannot support proceeding and needs their concerns addressed before moving forward. 3 fingers means neutral or stand aside. The person doesn't have strong feelings and will support whatever the group decides. 4 or 5 fingers means active support or championing. The person endorses the decision and will help make it successful. The rule is, if anyone votes less than 3, the discussion continues. This prevents false consensus, where people silently disagree but don't speak up. It also differentiates between opposition that needs addressing and neutrality that can be accepted. For exam scenarios, fist of 5 is appropriate when you need genuine consensus, not just majority vote. It's particularly useful for decisions the team will need to implement together, where hidden dissent could undermine execution. Dot voting, which we covered earlier for prioritization, also works for decision-making. Present options give everyone dots, have them vote. It's quick and democratic. Consensus does not mean unanimity. Consensus means everyone can live with the decision and will support it, even if it wasn't their first choice. Achieving consensus requires dialogue, listening, and sometimes compromise. The Fist of 5 technique helps verify that consensus has been reached. For exam purposes, participatory decision-making is preferred over top-down decisions because it builds ownership. When the team participates in a decision, they're invested in its success. When a decision is imposed, they may comply but won't champion. However, not every decision requires participation. The product owner makes prioritization decisions. The Scrum Master makes process decisions. Developers make technical decisions. Participatory techniques are appropriate when decisions affect multiple parties who need to support the outcome. One exam trap: participatory decision-making takes time. If a question presents a time-critical situation, extensive consensus building might not be the right answer. Balance participation with pragmatism. Question 28. How would you handle a scenario with a disengaged or hostile stakeholder? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Let me walk through a common exam scenario type: the stakeholder who isn't engaging appropriately. Scenario: a key stakeholder never attends sprint reviews but frequently complains about the product direction through email. Their input is important, but they're not participating through proper channels. What should happen? First, let's identify what's not the right answer. Sending more detailed status reports is not correct. This treats communication as a push problem. If the stakeholder would just read more documentation, they'd understand. But this is exactly the opposite of Agile's preference for collaboration over documentation. More reports won't solve this. Escalating to the stakeholders manager is also typically not correct as a first step. This treats the symptom as a discipline problem rather than seeking to understand root causes. It may also damage the relationship. The correct approach involves engagement and understanding. The Scrum Master or product owner should meet with this stakeholder face to face. The goal is to understand why they're not attending reviews. Are the meetings at inconvenient times? Do they feel their input isn't valued? Are they overwhelmed with other responsibilities? Do they not understand the purpose of the review? This conversation applies emotional intelligence. You're demonstrating empathy by seeking to understand their perspective. You're using active listening to hear what they're really saying. Once you understand the root cause, you can address it. If timing is the issue, perhaps the review can be rescheduled or the stakeholder can attend remotely. If they feel unvalued, perhaps they need a more prominent role in the discussion. If they don't understand the purpose, education is needed. The goal is participation, not compliance. We don't want this stakeholder to silently attend meetings while remaining disengaged. We want them actively contributing feedback that improves the product. For exam purposes, stakeholder problems usually require engagement and facilitation, not enforcement or documentation. The answer that demonstrates empathy, seeks understanding, and offers collaboration is typically correct. Here's another scenario type: the stakeholder who micromanages the team, constantly providing direction that undermines self-organization. The wrong answer is to allow the interference, which enables an anti-pattern, or to confront the stakeholder aggressively, which damages the relationship. The correct answer involves the Scrum Master shielding the team. They meet privately with the stakeholder to understand their concerns. They explain how the current behavior impacts the team's effectiveness. They redirect the stakeholder to appropriate channels, working with the product owner on priorities, providing feedback during sprint reviews, requesting changes through the product backlog. The Scrum Master serves as a buffer, protecting the team's focus while maintaining the stakeholder relationship. This is servant leadership in action. Question 29. How should teams communicate bad news to stakeholders? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. This question tests your understanding of Agile values, particularly transparency and courage. Scenario: the project is behind schedule. The team realizes they won't meet the committed deadline. How should this be communicated? The wrong approaches include hiding the problem and hoping to recover, which destroys trust when the truth emerges. Waiting for the next formal status report, which delays necessary conversations. Burying the bad news in positive spin, which is dishonest. Blaming team members or external factors, which avoids responsibility. The correct approach applies several principles. Transparency demands that we make reality visible. Bad news must be communicated clearly and honestly. The information radiators, such as burn-down charts and Kanban boards, should reflect actual status, not optimistic projections. Anyone who looks at the board should see the truth. Timeliness matters. Bad news delivered early gives stakeholders time to respond. Perhaps scope can be cut. Perhaps resources can be added. Perhaps the deadline can be adjusted. But these options only exist if stakeholders learn early. Bad news delivered late leaves no room for adaptation. Face-to-face communication is preferred for bad news. Email allows misunderstanding and lacks opportunity for immediate dialogue. A direct conversation enables questions, clarification, and collaborative problem-solving. Courage is required. Nobody enjoys delivering bad news, but Agile values courage precisely because transparency sometimes requires difficult conversations. The team's long-term credibility depends on honest communication, even when it's uncomfortable. For exam scenarios, the correct answer involves communicating bad news promptly, not waiting; communicating directly, not through documentation; updating visible artifacts to reflect reality; focusing on solutions and adaptation rather than blame; being honest about the situation without excessive negativity. One nuance: the Scrum Master helps facilitate this communication, but doesn't typically deliver the message alone. The product owner, who represents stakeholder relationships, and possibly the team, should be involved. The message should come from those accountable for the work. Remember, trust is built through honest communication, especially when the news is bad. Teams that hide problems until they explode lose stakeholder confidence. Teams that surface problems early and work collaboratively on solutions build lasting trust. That concludes episode 3. We covered 9 important concepts. Take time to review these questions and answers and practice applying these concepts to scenario-based questions. In the next episode, we'll continue exploring the PMI ACP exam domains.